Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. And welcome to the School Start Times Task Force Community Forum. So I would like to just walk you through a couple of pieces as an introduction to the work of the School Start Times Task Force. And then I will hand it over to our school committee chair, Mr. Alan Jacobs. So our members, you can see them all, and you can read them. I won't read them to you. I just want to remind you that originally this committee, or a variation thereof, actually started getting together back in October of 2014. So this has been a project that has been going on for quite a while. So you'll see the members of the task force, and I'd just like to call out that Mr. Jacobs, Mrs. Keefe, Mrs. Tellier, Mrs. Gans, Mr. Bushy, Mrs. Goulart, and Ms. Saffron all have either children or grandchildren in the district right now. They're all enrolled in Falmouth Public Schools. So they have Mrs. Larry. I'm sorry, I saw two Melissas. So if we go on to the next slide, you will see that opportunities for membership. Anyone, this is an open meeting, so at any time anyone can join. Just email Mr. Jacobs, our school committee chair, if you'd like to join at this point. So a little bit about our process over the past 2 years. The goals of our process have been to be transparent, to be data-driven, to be interactive, and to be inclusive of as many voices as possible in the process. And our goals, truly to understand the research on the relationship of later school times on the health and academic performance of our students, and to examine the outcomes and benefits of later school start times within school districts that have already shifted their start times, to really look at the feasibility of changing start times right here in our own district in Falmouth, to generate possible scenarios referencing cost information, trade-offs, and other necessary resources, as well as policy and legal implications of making any of these changes, to understand and respond to the varied impacts on families and on our community, to outline the community impact, and to make some kind of recommendation to our school committee. Our key values throughout this process have been to ensure equity, to improve the overall health and wellness for all of our students, and to really look at and vet out solutions that are balanced. We have made every effort to include as many stakeholders in this process as possible, and we list many of them. And being ever mindful of the athletic piece for Falmouth High School and the impact on athletics, so the Atlantic Coast Athletic Conference, the MIAA, other public school districts looking at their athletic departments and how the shift in school start times has impacted athletics, and certainly the Massachusetts State Legislature. So when we think about making a change of this magnitude, we think about family schedules and childcare. These are some of our key issues outlined. Student employment for the older students. How is something like this going to impact family work schedules? Extracurricular activities for students. Again, interscholastic athletics. Field and gym access for sports. Collective bargaining. Transportation. Traffic. And again, keeping in mind statewide legislation. So that's just a brief outline of what this committee has been looking at and considering going through this process. And at this point, I would like to introduce our school committee team chair, Mr. Alan Jacobs.
Thank you, Nancy. I think I'm just going to start from here. It's on. So, thank you. Which one do we use? So, as Nancy said, the purpose of our task force has been to gain an understanding of the district's and the greater community's desire to alter school start times, and, if appropriate, determine the action steps, the resources, and the changes necessary in the short term and the long term to effect that change. So what are we doing here tonight? Tonight's purpose is to educate the community about the work in which we're engaged and to collect your feedback, your concerns, and your questions. The agenda for tonight is to review the purpose of our work, outline the trends in the current research and that provide a foundation for the work, and to share the highlights from the recent surveys that we did with families and with students. What we're not going to do tonight is develop scenarios. We haven't determined any possible scenarios because we feel like premature development of scenarios really inhibits the open process. We're really trying to be very, very open about this, to keep our minds open, to keep our brains open, to really think about everything. And so at this point, we don't want to come up with scenarios. What we want to do is hear where people are, and we can then use that over the next few months to develop these scenarios. So why look at school start times? If you look at the research, it's really clear that adolescents' sleep-wake cycles drastically change as their bodies mature. As a result of these dramatic changes, middle school and high school students especially often seem to stay up too late or at night and experience real difficulty in waking up the next morning. There's a body of research that suggests that later school start times for adolescents are an effective way for students to get more sleep as the adjusted times more closely align with their new sleep-wake cycles. And research shows that when middle or high school students' start times are pushed later, the students tend to go to bed at the same time, but due to waking up later, they increase their sleep. So shifting to a later school start time in order to accommodate these changes in adolescent sleep patterns has been found to improve academic performance and overall well-being. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends later school start times, no earlier than 8:30 a.m. for today's middle and high school students. And the Center for Disease Control and Prevention states that schools that have a start time of 8:30 a.m. or later allow adolescent students the opportunity to get the recommended amount of sleep on school nights, which is really about 8.5 to 9 hours. Continuing why we look at this. So what the research has also shown that adolescents that get less than 8 hours of sleep report higher depression symptoms, a greater use of caffeine, and a greater risk for making poor choices regarding substance abuse. The research has also found that academic performance outcomes, performance on standardized tests and so forth, attendance rates, tardy rates, show a significant improvement with an adjusted start time of 8:35 a.m. or later. And this is the one that just gets me in the gut, that the number of car crashes for adolescent drivers from 16 to 18 years old was shown to be significantly reduced by 70% when schools shifted start times from 7:35 to 8:55. That's the one that just really grabs me a lot. There was a study done in North Carolina. They looked at 4,333 fall asleep crashes, not intoxicated crashes and so forth. And what they found was that 55% of those crashes were individuals 25 years of age or younger. I mean, you can see the graph. You take a look at 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, the dramatic number of car crashes as a result of kids falling asleep while they're driving. Keep that in mind as we kind of talk a little bit about the research that we found. Theodora Karpus, who is now a sophomore at Falmouth High School, did a research project last spring, and she asked the 9th, 10th, and 11th graders about their sleep patterns. And as you can see here, 90% of 9th, 10th, and 11th graders self-reported getting less than 8 hours of sleep. Remember what the CDC and the American Pediatrics talked about. 8 hours of sleep is what you need. So 90% of our students self-reported that they're getting less than 8 hours of sleep, and almost half reporting that they're getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night. Theodora did great work on this. The Communities for That Care You survey that was done last year showed that in the prior 30 days, something like 23% of our students self-reported using alcohol, 5.5% self-reported using cigarettes, and 22.5% self-reported using marijuana in the previous 30 days. So again, think about, you know, the studies that show a greater use of substance abuse. So what's our timeline? What are we doing here and so forth? We created the website, which is up this summer. We put together a whole series of surveys. We interviewed consultants to determine the level of expected transportation services for scenario developed. We presented the draft plan to the school committee in August, and we released the student, staff, and family surveys on September 12th. Hopefully you all received those surveys and filled them out. As we went along, for the first couple of weeks of September, we monitored the survey responses. After that, we started to analyze the survey. We're going to share some of that with you tonight. We haven't, you know, I'll tell you there's so much data we haven't been able to get into all of it, but I think we really culled some important pieces. A couple of weeks ago, we updated the school committee in terms of the survey results. We're having this community education forum tonight. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be meeting with all of the teachers, the staff, the school council, the PTOs, the booster clubs, and so forth, doing a lot of community outreach. Again, not to develop scenarios, but really to understand people's concerns about this. In December, we'll bring that back to the school committee to talk about what we learned through this process. Then, from December to February, that's when we'll start to put together the scenarios. And again, after we put those scenarios, we're going to come back to the teachers, to the staff, to the students, to the school council, to the PTOs. Report back on that to the school committee in March, have a public hearing on the scenarios at the end of March, make a recommendation to the school committee in April, and have a vote, if there is a vote necessary, by the school committee at the beginning of May. So that's what we've been doing. I'm going to now turn this over to Sonia. She will give you an indication or a rundown of some of the preliminary results for the surveys that we've done.
All right. Thank you, Alan. So as Alan mentioned, we have a wealth of data that we are trying to make our way through. And in the mining process, what we've decided to call out first is responses from our students and then compare the responses that we've received from families across grade levels. And we've identified for this process grades 7 through 12 as we go through the data. And again, we have data from students and families, grades 5 and 6, families earlier than that. And then our data from our faculty and staff, our colleagues across the district that we still have to take the time to go through. As Alan mentioned, we also have a website that we created over the summer, and so the slides from this presentation, as are the slides from the August 23rd kickoff presentation and the October 4th preview of data, that's all going to be posted to our website. So it's, if you go to the Falmouth Public Schools and you click on School Committee, it's at the bottom of the drop-down menu. So to go through some of the data, what we're looking at first here, as Alan alluded to in the research and the recommendation, Theodora's presentation about sleep patterns was shared with the Start Times Task Force at the very beginning of the summer. And we had a very similar question that we asked of students. So starting on the left side and moving across, you can see each of the stacked bars, grades 7, 8, up through 12. What we noticed was that students at grades 7 and 8, so our Lawrence students were reporting just shy of 10% of them were getting less than 6 hours of sleep. And as we look at the shift in the pattern for our teenage students at the high school, we have by grade 12, that bright blue at the bottom of the stacked bar on the far right, 31.5% of our students are reporting less than 6 hours of sleep. And we didn't quantify that beyond less than 6. If you go across and you look at the options, it was less than 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8. And then by the time we got up near 10, we were like more than 10, and that's the very slim bars at the top of each of those stacked bars. If we take a step beyond that, the blue at the bottom, and we add in that brighter maroon color right above it, we're looking at nearly 80% by grade 12. Our students are reporting less than 7 hours of sleep per night. And then you match that up against the recommendation, or you don't match it up really, against the recommendation of 8.5 or more hours of sleep per night for them to be able to function at their fullest potential. We take this and we compare it to how we received responses from families asking the same question. We noticed that it was approximately at grade 7 at the beginning here, again on the far left, we noticed approximately 19% of families perceive that their children are getting 7 hours or less per sleep, which is nearly double what students had reported. And then as we move across, again, you see that families are less likely to report, even at grade 12, that students are receiving less than 6 hours of sleep. However, our students had reported nearly a 20% difference and almost 70% getting 7 hours or less. So we start to see a discrepancy in those perspectives. And certainly there are additional questions we could go back and ask, and there's speculation we can do, but the biggest piece here is what our students are telling us is that they're not getting enough sleep. We moved beyond the hours of sleep and we started to talk about patterns of sleep deprivation. How often do students report feeling sleepy? And many of our students reported in the lighter maroon towards the bottom of the stacked bar and the tan color in the middle that between every day, or at least 3 to 4 times a week, they feel sleepy. And that can be at any point in their routine. We did not delineate that by, is it during the school day or is it right after or towards athletics? But what we found particularly important is that if they're reporting feeling sleepy, and we're seeing this pattern increase where they're feeling more sleepy and getting less hours of sleep as they approach grade 12, what does that mean? Because those are also our students who are driving. And we can see here when we isolate out grades 11 and 12, we have nearly 70% of our juniors reporting that they feel somewhere between 1 or 2 times a week up to daily, they feel sleepy while they're driving. And then you make the connection back to the slide that Alan presented earlier about car crashes, and it just starts to really put those data trends into perspective when we think that this is what our students are telling us. Again, considering the sleepiness question and this time making the comparison, this was more aligned. Students and families across the grade levels were more aligned in what they were reporting for rates of sleepiness. Parents are seeing the same behaviors that students were reporting. So following along, we've talked about hours of sleep and how often students and then families' observations of students, it's tied to sleepiness. We then started to think, okay, well, if we're going to respond to sleepiness, this means a change in routine. So we looked at impact on morning routines. So this is not broken out by grade level. This is broken out in clusters by school. So at Morse Pond, our students said that this is the lower half of the bar. 51% of them said that it would either make their morning much easier or have little to no impact to shift the times. By the time we look up to the high school, it's 71% combined across the 4 grade levels, saying that it would either make their morning much easier or have slightly to little impact. But we see there's less of the my morning would be more challenging responses as the grades go across. Same question asked to families. And it's fairly even across all of the grade levels, so we can certainly speculate about other factors, and that's what we're hoping, you know, as you ask questions and share concerns tonight, that's something you'll help us highlight a little bit better. But it's just about 50% across all levels reporting that the morning would be either much easier or easier. The tan in the middle is the report on no impact. So we have more reporting to us that there would be an easier management of the morning as opposed to a greater challenge. We asked the same questions looking at afternoon routines. We can see a fairly similar trend across all of the grade groups from Morris Pond to Lawrence to the high school. And our high school students, all students had an opportunity to write in comments, but our high school students were very clear to share that they had concerns about the impact of their extracurricular activities, concerns about athletics, and also as the ages went up in range, they also expressed concerns about employment that they have after school. And then we can see a very similar trend again looking across the family responses with regards to the same question about afternoon routines. Afternoon routines, though, are cited as being slightly more challenging. And again, I think, you know, when we looked back over the comments, a lot of those were aligned to the same things the students were telling us about their afternoons, especially as we went to the upper grade levels. And then we also wanted to isolate out from one of our questions concerns about childcare. And I think that one of the things we learned in this process, the dark blue bar at the top of each stacked bar, that's reporting how many of our students never have any type of sibling care responsibilities, which we were surprised to find was the great majority as we went across. But we do have some students who regularly or sometimes do bear that responsibility. So again, we recognize that not all of our data is drawn from the numbers, from the quantitative side. So I'm going to turn the mic back over to Alan to share some of the comments that we gleaned.
So we did have an open response in the survey where we just asked parents, students to just talk to us, tell us what they were thinking. And I can't tell you that there's a trend here. I can tell you that there's basically two trends. There is one trend, which you see up here, of parents saying this is a real issue. We need to do something about it. Kids need more sleep. And then we have the other side of the issue in which parents are saying, look, we have our routines, we have our family time, it's very important to us. Our kids are playing sports, our kids have jobs, it's very important. Please don't do anything with this. And I have to tell you that going through the comments, it was pretty split, right down the middle, you know, in terms of the number of parents on each side of the question. The same thing really happened for students. You know, there were a lot of students who said, look, I just need to sleep more in the morning. I'm staying up too late. I'm feeling sleepy all the time. And then there were other students that say, please don't do this because I need to, you know, I'm playing sports and I don't want to get home from my sports or I've got a job, these kinds of things. Again, fairly consistent right down the middle. One thing that came pretty clear through both the student responses and the faculty, the family responses, was there was a real concern about the amount of homework. That was, you know, and we didn't ask any questions about homework, but when we asked for comments, a lot of people came back, a lot of families came back and said, there's just plain too much homework. That's what's keeping my kid up so late at night. You won't be surprised that students had the same kind of response. So what are the takeaways? What do we kind of take away from everything that we've talked about today? The way I kind of see it is that as in many communities, our middle school students, our high school students, they don't get the recommended amount of sleep, which is about 8.5 to 9.5 hours on school nights, and they feel sleepy or they feel sleep deprived. But we also find that while later school start times would have little or no impact or make the mornings easier, that wasn't, you know, I don't think we needed a survey to say if we didn't make you get to school as early, would it make your morning easier? Yes. But we also found that getting out of school would have a negative effect on close to half of the families. So back and forth there. And it really seems to me that the community is really split in terms of its desire as to whether they want to do anything to alter school start times. So that kind of where that comes to me, which I've been saying to the school committee since we started this process, regardless of what we do, we're going to make some people angry here. And so what we're trying to do here, and this is one step in the process, and we'd love to hear from you, is where, you know, you're turning out tonight, you're concerned about this, what are your feelings? So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy.
Thank you. So this is your opportunity to voice concerns, to ask questions, to perhaps share thoughts that we didn't think of, but we would like to hear from you, and I would only ask that, thank you, Mr. Weber, that if you would like to come up, please speak into the microphone so that anybody watching at home or when this is televised, they can actually hear your questions.
Come on down.
Can we start? Okay. And then, Deb, why don't you come down, and then we'll just form that line. That would be great.
I just wanted to ask on the towns that have instituted the later start times for high schools and middle schools, does anybody have the statistics on how much better their school grades improved by? Because I have heard from some research that I've done on my own that they have indeed, the grades have gone up as a result of the later start times.
I don't know that we have research from local schools, but some of the studies that we referenced at the beginning, we talked about, that certainly is a pattern that does seem to be holding, that when start times go later, academic performance does improve. And in this presentation, you'll see the reference to those particular studies if you want to go take a look at those.
Thank you. I was one of the people that wrote in and said if the start time changes, I would like the homework load to be at least cut in half. That would help regardless, even if the start times don't change. But I'm most curious, I imagine the push and pull between the different populations in towns that have looked at this are very similar to Falmouth. And I'm just curious, as in towns that did adopt the program, has there been a general acceptance and welcoming of it after X number of years, or does it continue to be a source of contention?
Want to take that?
Sure. So some of the districts that we've been in closest contact with are actually going through the process in a very similar timeline as we are. And then we know from a couple of the other communities with whom we've reached out that the more inclusive the process as you go through, so that's, you know, just like the steps we're taking tonight and we gain insight, the easier it may make any change. But again, we're going back towards the fact that, you know, a change that one district may make fit that district. So the change that we may make has to fit ours. And I think that to just compare it one-to-one or a couple-to-one isn't going to give us the right answer. I think it's unique to each district, their needs, and the approach that they take. I'm sorry it's not the most specific answer, but it really does become about fit.
What is the history of this change? Because has the high school always started so early? And if not, why was the change made and when was the change made? And was it a huge revolution to the town at the time?
On the start time of Falmouth High School?
Yeah, when did it starting so early?
When I started teaching 42 years ago, I remember it was around 7:20, 7:30.
I don't think there has been a significant change because I started in the district 24 years ago. It's been right around 7:15, 7:22, I believe.
I'll spare raising the microphone. Greg Parkinson, one of the pediatricians in town, and to paraphrase Judy Collins, I would say I've looked at sleep from both sides now as both a parent and of 3 current and former high school students, and watching the kids in the community. And you know, the first thing I want to do is commend you on the sort of thorough job that you've done at trying to look at all the issues and take as many opinions into account as you have. It's clearly you've put a lot of thought and effort into it. A couple of things that I would add in, when last time around when this discussion came up 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm sure you're factoring these things in, but I just want to make sure that they continue to be factored in. There have been specific concerns about segments of students, you know, the so-called high flyers versus the other ones, and there is actually good data to suggest that even the highest achieving students do benefit from the school start times. They actually are more efficient with the homework that they have, and therefore they still end up going to bed at the same time. The second thing is, and I know you're not looking at scenarios yet, but inevitably when scenarios are looked at, one of the questions that comes up is, you know, impact on younger children, and what is, you know, what is the data around that, which is certainly less than there is for the adolescents. The predominant feeling is that it's the number of hours of sleep that matter for the younger kids and not the start time. In other words, younger kids tolerate getting up earlier than the teenagers, which certainly jibes with you know, what most people would say who have had you know, kids raring to go in first grade at 7:30, and that's certainly not the case for the high school students, even the same ones that were raring to go when they were little kids. The third issue, and again, this relates to a few steps down the road, but of course the practical issue that hasn't been mentioned tonight is busing, and I would encourage you to dial down as significantly with the busing data as you have with the sleep data. The estimates that have been used in terms of percentages of children that or teenagers who ride the bus, you know, the question comes up: what if 75% of people ride the bus? How often do they? You don't have only to look at the high school parking lot and see the number of cars there to say that it may not. My concern is that there's an overestimate of the number of kids riding the bus, and that would impact the ability to make changes in terms of combining routes and practically speaking with that. The last thing I want to do is to make available, was fortunate enough last time to be able to make contact with Dr. Judith Owens, who is the author, she's the lead author of the American Academy of Pediatrics statement, and she's a internationally recognized sleep physician, and she's been willing to communicate with us on any particular data points that we're not able to generate, as you know, in terms of at least what the state of knowledge is around.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I do have to adjust the mic. Sorry about that. Good evening. I'm speaking as a parent of 2 very young children. I have a son who's 4 years old, who will be entering kindergarten in 2 years, and I have a daughter who's currently in first grade at North Falmouth Elementary School. I'm also an elementary teacher in another district, and while I'm in full support of the research, my concern is that while we have not discussed scenarios, I think there are large implications for the social and emotional well-being of our young children in the community. As a teacher myself, as we know as teachers, our days aren't just 9 to 3, they're jam-packed, and I have the luxury of still having a shortened day compared to many of my friends and my husband and other family members that work till 5, 6 o'clock at night. So when I picture a 5, 6, 7-year-old entering school much earlier, their reality is probably going to be aftercare of some sort, because for a majority of us these days, we are working families. And as an elementary teacher, I will say that I know the research is limited because historically we've started later, but I deal with sleepy kids all the time, whether it's because they're at before care or free breakfast or after care. So I think the financial implications it would have on working families of young children, as well as just their overall well-being. My daughter gets up very early, but is she independent and able to get herself ready and off to school at 6:55 for the bus? Not so much without mommy's help. So I know, like I said, scenarios aren't being played out this evening. And while I'm in support of the high school students and getting the rest that they need, if there is an optimal start time, such as globally it's 8:30, as some of the research supports, or 8:15, I know financially it's very difficult for districts to accommodate a start time for all schools at the same time. But I think sacrificing the youngest kids in the community for the oldest kids in the community can be difficult. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Adam Thomas. I have 2 students in Falmouth High School, and I have a couple of concerns. First, a question, though. In the slide, you guys talked about there's state legislation. Is there talk of some sort of statewide initiative that would require high schools to start later, or I'm just wondering why that state legislation piece was there.
There have been initiatives at the state level to mandate start times and so forth. It's been brought up. I don't think it's gotten very far.
So I guess my concern is that both of my students, or my sons, are involved in sports and extracurricular activities. I do see the later start time just pushing back with the homework burden, that bedtime later and later. And so that's really a concern for me. I also have a concern about the most vulnerable portions of our population. When you talk about, aftercare, and there's kind of that comment that, well, it's a very small group of people that are caring for or working after school. Those are the most vulnerable people in our population, and they need the most support possible. I think we need to be careful about sort of looking at this as all the people here in this room who have the ways and the means to get here and talk and be vocal and be heard, and that silent majority is not represented here tonight. So that's a second concern I have. And I also look at the big picture as far as this is going to cost us some money. Okay, I know we're not talking about scenarios, but I can't imagine this is going to be a cost-neutral situation. So the other part, I think that I would ask that you do is you tell us what is going to change. What are we going to lose if we move to this? Or, I mean, maybe it is cost-neutral, but I don't know. Nothing seems to be that way these days. Well, that's what I got for you guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Van Moy. My kids are 12 and 14. I'm also an educator. And my husband's a scientist, and he sent me an article today called Synchronizing Education to Adolescent Biology. Let Teens Sleep, Start School Later. I'm obviously in favor of this, and this research I read today supports what was presented and what also supports what Dr. Parkinson said, and also what I heard a couple years ago. What's exciting, I think, is that what's happened with research is that it's new. This is all new from 30 years ago. I read a quote in here, but a lot of educators think, this includes me, that adolescents are tired, irritable, and lazy. But the research is saying it's not actually true. The behavior is what's happening in their brain. They're not getting enough sleep to do the things we're asking them to do. So I think that I'm excited to see this process go forward, but I think what we're dealing with is actually new. Science is showing us that our kids need rest to perform, to do the things we're asking them to do at school. It's what's happening, it's brain development. So I'm excited that we're looking at this, but I don't think it should be necessarily put to bed because of routines. We all make routines to get through our days. We get up earlier, we make rules for our kids, everybody's got to get up, get their teeth brushed, we've got sports, we've got homework. There'll be a million things that we have to adjust whenever school starts, and we will, because that's what parents and families and communities do. But this hasn't been looked at in a long time. Nobody here could remember why we started school at 7:30. We just do, and then we make it work. But the new research is showing that it's not working for our kids. So if we could make some changes, I think the rest of us would figure out how to do all the other things we need to do, like work and take care of siblings and do the sports we care about. But I think that the research is pretty powerful, and I hope that we continue to look at it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just was curious as to the response rate to the surveys. And also, I may have misinterpreted what you said, but I was curious, you were, made a comment that you were mostly in contact with other communities that are following the same timeline. And if that's the case, I would just want to encourage you to really reach out further to the communities that have already gone through the process, who may have, you know, better hindsight and other suggestions to offer since they've already gone through it. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, sorry, the first question was the response rate to the surveys?
Do you remember that number?
Sorry, I process all my through writing, so I'm writing as you're talking. I didn't bring the response rates with me when I walked out the door, but I will tell you that it was an incredibly high, thank you to many members of our task force, incredibly high response rate across grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. It came down a little bit when we got to our high school in terms of students. We had a high response rate across our faculty and staff across all grades. Our family response rate was considered statistically significant. It was above the 30 to 40% threshold, but I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look that up, but that is something that we could post on our website once we go back and verify that.
Well, I was going to try not to share. I have 2 students in the school. I wanted to ask if you looked at all at how much of a change do you need to make in the start time to produce some sort of impact? I mean, has that been looked at all? Like, do you need to change it 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes?
Well, we haven't developed scenarios, but we do know that.
I mean, I didn't know if that was part of the studies, like, you know,
Well,
how much people shifted.
So the only thing I can say is that if you look at the research, the various researchers talk somewhere between 8:15 and 8:45 in terms of a start time, and Falmouth High School right now starts at 7:22.
I'm very aware of that, unfortunately. So the other thing I want to share is I moved here 8 years ago from Georgia, and in Georgia, the school that starts first is the elementary school, and they start at 7:50, I think. And then the middle school starts next, and the high school starts last. They seem to still get all their sports in and all their other stuff. There's plenty of families that work, kids that work, you know, it's just a matter of getting used to something different. When I moved here, I was shocked that elementary school started at 9:05. And all I could wonder about is what was I going to do with my first grader for 3 hours in the morning? I mean, it was just shocking to me. So I think people can get used to it, and 7:20 for many, many years is, it's not, we shouldn't just keep it just because that's how it is. I mean, that just seems silly. The other question I had, I know it's a big nut to crack, I didn't know if it's going to be feasible. What about the union with the teachers and their start times and rules and all those things? Is that something that you can feasibly overcome?
Well, they're a stakeholder
Right.
in the process, and if we get to that point, it would be a negotiation with the union.
I mean, you feel like it's possible?
I would
Hope
feel
so.
hopeful,
Okay.
you know, that if we came, you know, as a community and said that, I would feel hopeful, but I can't respond to that.
Because I would think they'd have to approve it, right? I mean, you have to,
Given the way the contract is, yes, there would have to be a conversation about it.
Okay?
Sorry. Are there any grants available to help with the cost of any cost implications?
Many grants are not sustainable over long periods of time. So I'm certain that we could look at opportunities that might be for planning, but they're not actually to then incur costs that would be long-term associated to this type of change.
Hello. I'm sorry if I missed anything. I was at home trying to watch it, and the sound was kind of in and out and kind of messed up, so I drove down here. So, a couple things. I have 3 daughters, 2 at the high school and 1 in 7th grade. When I first asked them as a parent, now I'm speaking, when I first asked them, my sophomore last year said, "Dad, what's it matter? There's 24 hours in the day. I have X amount of school, I have X amount of sports, I have X amount of homework, and when I'm done, I go to bed." That was her thought process. So she says, unless you take something of those hours away from me, I will sleep as much as, and she's a pretty high-flying kid, she's an AP kid, but she says it's the amount of things I have to do that make my sleep, because what's the difference if I go to bed at 10 and wake up at 6, or go to bed at 11 and wake up at 7? It's all relative to the hours in the day. So, and when she's done at night, if she's done at 9:30, she's going to bed. Some nights she's done at midnight, she's going to bed, but that's the hours there. Also, I like to think, I'm a Falmouth Public School employee. I like to think we have a good school system. We have a level 1 high school, and we have a level 1 junior high school. We are a high-performing district, and we're thinking of changing that. That scares me a little bit. I mean, if you look at around Cape Cod, we are probably I don't know of another one. I'm not speaking of level 1 junior high and level 1 high school in the same district. It does scare me that I am an athletic person. I believe in athletics. It seems that Nauset is they are the school system that has started late. So we play them in sports, and it messes us up tremendously because they have to come later, or they have to, financially, I know field hockey just played Nauset. They had to come on separate days because they couldn't get here till 5 o'clock because school ended, so they had to spend busing on a JV game on Thursday and a varsity game on Friday. So I'm worried about the financial impact of if we start later. I mean, obviously in a perfect world, everybody would start 8:15 to 8:45. That means if we do that, our busing now has become a 3-tier system down to a 1-tier bus system. So that is concerning to me, where we have all these other issues money-wise. But that's just a few thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Deb? Could you come down?
I noticed on the slide that you hope to make a decision of some sort in early May, and if you do decide to change the start time, is that something that would begin in September of 2017? Or is that up for conversation?
I think in our minds, we were thinking that it would take a year of preparation. So it would be September of 18, I
18.
guess.
Okay, thank you.
That would,
Thanks.
so we do have another meeting scheduled, is it in 2 weeks? It's not next week, is it? Where we have the other schools?
Monday
Is it
night?
this-
It's Monday
This
night.
Monday night, okay. Yes, this Monday night, we've put an invitation out to school committees, athletic directors, and so forth in the surrounding towns, and the towns that we're in the same league with and so forth, Because as Sonia said, if you look at most towns, they may not be doing the same thing we're doing, but people are looking at this as an issue, and so forth. So you're all welcome to come to that meeting next Monday night if you'd like to get further information.
I got one more, if you don't mind.
Okay,
No,
Adam.
please.
Adam Thomas again. The second, or the question I forgot to ask was, although I think homework is a major issue in the amount of sleep that the kids are getting, the second issue is definitely the devices. And I know that that's not something necessarily you guys can control, but how much of a factor is their sleep deprivation because they're on their device all night? And, you know, if we move the start times back and they still stay on the phone all night, that doesn't solve anything either. So I guess I'm asking you to look at both of those issues, the homework issue and the, you know, the cell phone issue as potential things to factor into all this. So.
Thank you.
We've actually speculated that perhaps the difference that Sonia talked about in terms of the students saying they go, you know, get a certain amount of sleep, and the parents saying they get a certain amount of sleep is the parents think, oh, he went to bed. And yes, he went to bed and he's sitting there with his phone. So we don't, yeah, it's a great point. We go through that every night with my son. Any other comments or questions?
Would anyone like to add anything else that perhaps this committee needs to look at as we move towards making a recommendation to the school committee? Okay, well, this won't be your only option, so keep thinking about it and join us at another time. But thank you all very much for coming out tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Good job, Sonia. Thank you. I think I captured everything for our next meeting.